Clark out of Madison. She is a annexation specialist and has shared with us some information in our ongoing discussion with the Village of Sister Bay on plant ownership and expansion. And at the suggestion of Lou, we're going to kick the can down the road for a future board. When we're not here, we don't care. No, we're not going to do that. So. All right, going on. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And welcome and thank you for coming. And as quickly, if you have a cell phone, if you wouldn't mind putting it either on vibrate or off so it's not to interrupt the meeting. And a reminder to the board to speak into the microphones. We have a new screen up here. The old one has been moved into the conference room. So when we are in session in there, we can access the internet or access the county website to gain more information or hit maps and so forth. So this one's larger, although as Paul pointed out to me, it's been up there for a while. I didn't realize it. All right, we need to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda for November 6th.
Second?
All in favor, please.
Aye.
Motion carries. And we have the minutes of the October 16th meeting of the board. Any additions, corrections, please?
I move to approve the minutes for the October 6th town board meeting.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. All right, we have the bills. Any questions on those bills? Any additions on those bills?
No.
No,
Just
okay.
What you see is what you get.
I'll make a motion then to pay the bills as presented.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Administrators report.
One thing that's been suggested that we do as a board or a committee, whatever, is that the Historical Society is anxious to get going on the Klinke Garage. We've checked into the insurance on that, and technically the only way that someone that works on the building, in order to be covered with insurance, they would have to be a member of a committee of the town, unless they bring in a contractor, electrical, or structural, or whatever, who would have their own insurance and work on the building. So just by somebody showing up and saying they want to work on the building, if they're not a committee member, they're not going to be covered by insurance, and there could be an issue. So that's going to have to be decided if the board wants to go that route. And there's also some decisions to be made on exactly what, how that building is going to be set up and what needs to be done. Some of the initial comments I've heard is in order to shore the building up further, they're going to have to move all the stuff out of there in order to work in there, and they're looking for a spot to store it. We're checking it to see if it'll fit in the building out, the quarry out there. This time we're not sure, we're not really sure about it. So that has to be gone over in the future. Since the last board meeting, we've had the informational meetings on the budget, and the budget hearing, the special town meeting, and the special board meeting, and everything is in the works. I've been working on that off and on, mainly on the mill rate worksheet has been altered a bit by the county property listing department, and that's partly because of the way revenue now is suggesting, and requiring in the near future how these numbers get submitted and sent in. So it's going to be more direct, I believe, the way it sounds from the towns, but the planning part, or the real property will still have their finger on it a bit to make sure nothing really goofy happens with these submissions, so they're not aren't any major goof ups with the tax bills as they go out. Other than that, I've been visiting the Gills Rock property off and on, watching the water go up and down. The staircase is secure. That was shored up on the bottom by Paul and Hawkers. Did a great job on there. I was down there when he was finishing up, and he was down in the water. I didn't envy him at all down there because the waves were pushing him around, and he had his son with him there smoothing out the concrete. And I think they did a great job, and it's going to hold up at least until the ice shows up, if that happens. So that's basically it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions anybody has?
Regarding the work at the garage, and I'm assuming any other such work that would be done, they need to be members of a standing committee, I'm assuming?
Yes.
That something like a ad hoc wouldn't
Some kind of,
suffice?
an official committee of the board that's appointed by the board.
So that means that if a quorum of them were in the Kalinke garage, they'd have to have a notice
They'd have to put up
posted?
a
and-
notice, yeah,
Oh,
that
gosh, yeah.
they were on site.
Get a per diem.
Okay, any other
Or
questions?
You have to give Lou a hammer.
So,
Have any of them checked into, insurance policies for themselves?
they do have insurance, but it only covers if they're on their own property. And they apparently cannot get it for off-site
Mhm.
work like that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, we probably could create a special committee for that project, I would think.
But they'd have to abide by all the regulations and
Yeah.
stuff, open meetings and
Yeah.
things.
They'll have to let the office know when
Yep.
they're gonna be there working, and
If there was a quorum.
like I say, if there's gonna be a quorum, then we'd have to stick up a notice. Let's say they're gonna work there 2 or 3 days a week, we could stick up a notice to cover those 2 or 3 days, so we don't have to go running out every day and stick a notice up, but.
And you
just
have
let
to
the
pay a
public
per
know
diem, too.
What's going on.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, going on to public input, this is the opportunity to address the board on any subject you'd like, and also on any agendized subject. Anybody have any general comments they'd like to make? Anybody for an agendized item, please? Yes. Just name, please.
My name, Paula Christensen.
And for
and
which
it's
one?
For item 15.
Yes, sir?
Robert Dowling, item 15 as well.
15 also, you
Yep.
said?
Yes.
Anybody else, excuse me, anybody else on anything? Okay, going on then, fire board report.
The fire calls and the EMT calls are on target to exceed the previous year, and that had been the highest in the history of the department, at least for the last 20 years or so. And apropos of that, though, is the idea that, like almost every volunteer department in the country, ours is no exception, recruitment and retention of firefighters and other volunteers is a huge issue. It doesn't occur as much in our community, I think in large part, to the leadership of Chief Hecht. But we have a new crew of trainees for both the EMT and fire department that is beginning its training. But there's a very large great attrition rate, and that has to do with something much more fundamental. And that has to do with the lack of housing and the lack of job opportunities in Northern Door. So everything kind of goes back to a lot of things we talk about as underlying problems that we face. In fact, on the agenda for the next fire board meeting, which will be December 18th at 2:45, we are going to raise the issue of attainable housing insofar as, for example, the Rotary Club might be taking the initiative in part to sponsor some, but also, though, to see about how we might be able to emphasize volunteering in, as an EMT or firefighter, could get you certain points that would make someone more eligible for attainable housing, as long as there's a program that allows for somebody to be evaluated along those lines, which I don't know about having. So we're kind of doing the retention and recruitment for firefighting and EMT service as a backdoor to figuring out what we can do for attainable housing. And thirdly, the board, the fire board, approved an agreement for an apparatus consultant to take a review of all the apparatus. The working assumption, based mostly on optics in terms of what the community would tolerate, is that a piece of equipment, which is the lion's share of the budget for the fire department, that a piece of equipment should really last between 25 and 30 years. It doesn't mean that that is the way you maximize the efficiency of that particular apparatus. In other words, it gets to a point, it could be 10 years or 12 or 15 or 20 years, where the expense of maintaining that equipment exceeds the value of it. And that a program that would necessarily suggest replacing the equipment at a certain point, rather than spending more money in the long run on that equipment, would be to the benefit of the taxpayers of the town and the village. And so the apparatus consultant will sort of provide the charts for each piece of equipment. Not much can be done for that 25-year-old equipment that we currently have, or 30-year equipment, in fact, that we currently have. But as we rotate new equipment into the inventory, the newer guidelines as to how long that should be maintained before we start to lose money and make it more expensive than it would be to buy new equipment would be part of what we would be looking at as well.
Thank you. Any questions anybody has? All right, if not, we'll go on to number 13, consider resolution 1419, participation in section 125 premium only plan.
So this is a resolution that is required to be passed every year in order to have the, I can't think of the word now, the payment of our health insurance.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 1419, participation in section 125 premium only plan.
Second.
Discussion?
I guess I was wondering, why is it a cafeteria plan? Where does that come from?
what they
But
call
that's
it.
not, that's not really pertinent, but
There's
Back
no
to food.
I thought we, yeah. Okay.
We were treated to pecan
Pecan
pie
In
before
our
the meeting.
cafeteria?
Some of us are still on the pecan pie.
Hi, yeah.
Okay, we have the motion and second for the resolution. Roll call, please.
Schwengel?
Aye.
Ward?
Aye.
Kavazis?
Aye.
Goss?
Aye.
Lowry?
Aye. All right, and the resolution passes. Thank you. Going on to number 14, consider recommendation of the Finance Committee that funds pledged from the town for grants shall not exceed the dollars contributed by grant partners, nor exceed the percentage required by the granting entity.
Well,
Nancy?
this came out of our last Finance Committee meeting, and basically what it says is, let me back up a little bit. Most grants that are applied for require a buy-in from the person or the entity receiving the grant. Sometimes it's 50%, sometimes it's 20%. It is rarely just a gift. And the Finance Committee wanted to make sure that the town had or has a policy where if the town puts in X amount of dollars, the grant puts in at least that amount of dollars, so that so you don't wind up putting in more than you're going to be matched, if you will.
Any questions anybody has?
How would we remember this 5 years from now?
Well, there's a question.
In other words, how will this be
How do
memorialized?
we- 1 year from now?
Yeah. By the time I get to the car outside.
Well, I think it would have to be in some way communicated every year to the Finance Committee.
Especially with regard to grants.
Yeah.
I know there will be those of us out there who will watch the grants. I mean, it doesn't come up very often or happen very often where there is a risk of the town being on the hook for more than the grant is worth, if you will. But it probably would not be a bad idea every budget session before it begins to remind those of us who sit on the committee that this is town policy. There's a lot of opportunities for grants do come up, and it's exciting, and you want to go for it.
So other than in the minutes of tonight's meeting, could it be in the form of a resolution or part of like an ordinance that can be at least referenced?
That'd be
Resolution.
a good idea.
Yeah, why don't we bring it back for the next meeting as a
Resolution,
resolution?
sure, then it's in a book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Well, stick in the budget folder, so
yeah,
it comes up every year.
Mhm.
okay. All right, then going on to number 15, discussion and possible action, citizen complaint regarding the use of tannerite targets. We have two people that'd like to speak. Paul, you want to step to the podium and just a name and address, please?
I'm Paula Christensen at 11313 Beechwood Road in Sister Bay. And you have a letter actually in your packet from my husband, and his name is Roger Benedict. We live across the road from this person, Dave, who sets off target bombs. And he's done it at least 12 times this summer. Usually they're 2 at a time and about 5 minutes apart. And these sounds are really, really loud, like dynamite going off. In fact, one time we thought that their house had blown up. It was so loud. And it's very frightening. It shakes our house. It scares us. One time I jumped out of the chair that I was in because it's such an unexpected, loud explosion. And basically, these bombs are disruptive, they're annoying, and they're very dangerous. And we would like these explosions to stop. This person, our neighbor Dave, has had verbal altercations with several of our neighbors about several issues, including the regular use of fireworks every July. And he has refused to curtail the fireworks or the target bomb explosions. So we're hesitant to try to talk to him any further personally. In fact, when one of our neighbors went to talk with him about these target bombs, he started taunting her and saying, "Come on, sweetie, stay right here while I call the sheriff because you're trespassing." And he did call the sheriff because she had driven up onto his property just to talk to him about these bombs going off. And that evening, which was October 13th, was the sheriff's deputy came and talked with our neighbor, and my husband went over and talked with the sheriff. And the sheriff's deputy just said, I can't do anything because these bombs are legal. These bombs are often called Tannerite because that's the most common brand name of them. And there's a few things I learned about Tannerite. It includes ammonium nitrate and ammonium powder for fuel. It's sold in separate containers because once you mix the two elements together, they are considered an explosive. And so you can't sell a mixture, you can't transport a mixture, but you can sell them in separate elements. And so people purchase them like at Fleet Farm or even online, and they can purchase them in, quarter-pound packages up to 2-pound packages. The thing about once you mix them, then you have to shake them up and put them out, and they recommend over 100 yards to 200 yards. And the only way they're ignited is by a high-velocity rifle. So it has to be shot with a high-velocity rifle, which is a bullet moving at least 2,000 feet per second. So the smallest amount of Tannerite that you can get is a quarter pound. And my friend helped me figure this out, that's 7,000 times bigger than the legal amount that's stated in our statutes of fire, what's it called? The fireworks policy of a quarter of an ounce. And so it's 7,000 times larger. Tannerite is only used for fun. It's not used for any other purpose. It's a huge explosion and a huge puff of smoke and debris, depending on where you've set it. And it can be heard and felt up to and greater than a mile away, depending on if you use a quarter pound or 2 pounds. Tannerite is legal federally, but many states have restricted its use. It's restricted in many of the western states on federal lands because of the threat of fire. And it is restricted in California. You have to have a permit there. It's restricted in Maryland. You have to have a permit there. There have been many stories about safety issues with Tannerite. It has been shown because of the shrapnel that is blown off if you're using it near some item or in some item, that has killed people. It has dismembered people. It has burned people. It has caused large fires. They've traced the Oklahoma bombing to some Tannerite residue, and one of the bombings in New York City is also had Tannerite in a residue. These are all things I've found in reputable articles. The restrictions that we know of around here, we've talked with Dave Lanau, our Door County representative, and he said that the Peninsula Gun Club has banned target bombs like Tannerite over a year ago. I don't know exactly the date that they banned them, but when Roger talked to him, he said, I know very well what you're talking about, and we have banned them because they are so explosive and disruptive. And then I have an article that I'll be glad to share with you. It's from a sheriff in California, and he published an article in the magazine The Detonator, and that's the official magazine of people who are in the explosives business. And he ran his own tests around Tannerite because he was so concerned about this explosive. And he did find that Tannerite can be ignited using a blasting cap and an electric match. So it doesn't, as the Tannerite website says, you do not have to have a high-velocity rifle to ignite it. You can ignite it in other ways. So as you can see, there's a lot of concern about Tannerite, both personally in Sister Bay, Liberty Grove. And what we want is just for this to stop, because it's an issue that has been increasing in our neighborhood. This is the first summer that these explosions have been going off. This neighbor has been using fireworks I think probably not according to the fireworks policy in July, and we've just kind of ignored it. But now that these bombs have started going off, it's just really frightening and really disturbing. And so what we're asking is for you to consider the ordinances that you have, the state statutes that are out there, the disorderly conduct codes, the Wisconsin Fireworks Code. I've looked at all of these things, and I think tannerite is certainly not lawful under those codes. It is an explosive. It is something that is dangerous. It disturbs the environment that we want to create in Door County, and they're frightening, and they're potentially dangerous and lethal. And so I'd really encourage you to look into this further, and I'll share my statement and that article with you if you would like.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Robert?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Robert Dowling. I live at 1284 Garrett Bluff Court in Ellison Bay. I'm not directly affected by the explosions that Ms. Christensen has described for you, but she has made me aware of them. And I'm here to speak because after I became aware of her concern and her experiences, it occurred to me to take a look at two things. One, the fireworks ordinance that the town has in place. And secondly, the issue, which is not just limited to this particular neighbor's property, but is more widespread, of the use of private residential property for shooting ranges, whether or not an explosive target is being used, which is what tannerite is. Tannerite, you get it in a container, you mix it up, as Ms. Christensen described, you put it downrange a minimum of 100 yards, and that alone tells you the severity of that explosion and the danger it presents. And then you fire a high-velocity bullet to ignite it. What does it do? It simply tells you you hit the target because it explodes. That's its function. And because it's so powerful, it sends up a big explosion, even a quarter pound. And you can go online and see videos of this. The current ordinance that the town has, I think, directly applies and prohibits the use of these explosive targets of any kind, whether it's a tannerite brand or any other brand or any self-concocted, which you can do, believe it or not, create these things yourself. In Mr. Benedict's letter to the town, he indicated this is not a firework or firecracker. Well, it certainly isn't your grandparents' or my parents' sense of a firework. This is a off-the-scale firework. It is far more explosive than anything you could think of otherwise as an ordinary firecracker. And despite its extreme nature, I think it clearly falls within the ordinance that prohibits these types of explosive items. There's a reference in the ordinance to what's called a cap, which limits the amount of explosive material in a cap so as not to be considered a firework under the ordinance to I think it's 1.25 grains of explosive material. A quarter pound of tannerite, for example, contains, I think it's 4,303 4,350 grains of explosive material. It is, as Ms. Christensen pointed out, has 7,000 times the quantity of explosive material that is allowed under the ordinance for a cap to be considered not a firework. The other aspect of this that I mentioned earlier is shooting ranges. And that's where I live is being affected. What we found is that there has been an increase in people using on the weekends, in the summer, whatever, their backyards in residential areas for shooting ranges, semi-automatic weapons, high-powered rifles, whatever. And that is an activity that I think the board needs to be aware of. It is an activity, by the way, that the county zoning ordinances prohibit in any areas other than 3 specific zoning areas, which all entail large, undeveloped properties. So this is a situation that I want to alert the board to, that I'm concerned that it's not only going on now, but it's going to increase unless the board alerts the residents of Liberty Grove that this is not a permissible activity unless you are in the properly zoned area under the county ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, board? Oh, go ahead.
We just recently got a letter here from the neighbor that you were referring to, Pamela Banker, and the letter summarizes basically what you said, where she heard the blast in the afternoon, and then she went over because she was concerned that something had happened somewhere, and then the person had called the sheriff's department, and the deputy came over to her and told her she was trespassing on his property, and that the tannerite was a legal item to use. And then she quotes at the end of the letter ordinance 2-19 of the town fireworks policy, and then also mentions that the Peninsula Gun Club does not allow tannerite type targets to be used.
Okay. All right.
So the ATF website classifies this as a binary explosive, meaning you have to put the 2 parts together to create a explosive substance. And at that point, it can be listed it can be put on the list of explosive materials once they're combined, and then that's subject to regulations which would include you can't sell it in that form, you can't transport it in that form, but also because individuals, private citizens can use it, then you don't have to have a permit like you would if you were a company, like a construction company that was blasting for construction purposes. So that's kind of seems to be where the catch, that it's not exactly a firework, and while it's still separate, it's not an explosive even by the ATF. One of the companies that makes this talks about if you have a 1/4 pound of it and you're using it as target practice, they recommend 100-yard distance. At a couple of retail outlets, you can buy these in 1/2 pound packages. You can buy up to 20 of them at a time. So one of the manufacturers recommends you set this tannerite target a 1/4 pound 100 yards away, and for a full pound anywhere from 200 to 500 yards away. Nowhere in any of the manufacturer information do they talk about doing this in your backyard? Because, quote, "It's absurdly loud, creates a cloud of smoke, and can make the ground shake," which the nearby residents have reported. I talked to somebody on Muffin Lane, which kind of backs up to this area, and they told me that they didn't know what was going on, but they heard the explosion and they did feel, they were outside and heard the ground shaking. It seems to sort of be something that, for us at any rate, kind of drops through the cracks, and I don't think we can address that right now. But we did get copies, and I think you were aware of copies of the disorderly conduct ordinance that's in the, with county ordinances, dealing with noise disturbances, or, well, it talks about weapons, but it talks about a tending to disturb the peace and good order, or frighten any of the inhabitants of Door County. That last clause seemed to, the frightening of inhabitants of Door County certainly applied to the people I talked to on Muffin Lane, and seems to be evident in your letter. And I don't know about the zoning, but.
The zoning, I believe, is allowed only in Heartland 10, 510, large tracts of land like she mentioned. I too did a fair amount of research on this. I come from a long line of gun users, gun owners, gun collectors, and this, to me, is very much like years ago when we were dealing with people who were using 90-round capacity magazines. Nobody needs that much. And the people who do stuff like that for fun make it bad for the rest of us who handle firearms responsibly. My husband shoots on our 10.5-acre property every single day, but we don't have neighbors that are frightened. Sometimes our beagle mix runs to his crate, but he never shoots that much. He had never even heard of these targets, and he has been, since his military service many years ago, he has been involved with firearms. And when he started asking around and researching and calling his contacts that were familiar with these binary explosives, he was appalled. He wouldn't even dream of being so insensitive or rude to neighbors and to, what about people's dogs who are afraid of thunder? And it really does shake the ground. And for somebody, I forget, one of the articles I was researching, there was a statement made by one of the marketing people for Tannerite, and his comment was, why do we shoot it? Because it's fun, because we can. And I'm sorry, that doesn't allow you to do it. And it's unfortunate that people boards like ours have to consider making ordinances against something that should be common sense. But if it comes to it, I'm all in favor of writing up language that would disallow Tannerite or any binary recreational explosive to be used, and keep explosives in the hands of commercial, hawkers, people who have to blow things up as part of their job to create something else, not for fun.
I don't have a copy of the fireworks ordinance. But I don't think we need to go any further than that, in the sense that I think if you look at the intent of that ordinance, this would be, regardless of whether you call it a firework, if it explodes like a firework, if it deafens like a firework, it's a firework, or it does the same thing that the ordinance prohibiting the fireworks seems to want to protect against. And it would be a matter, I think, of amending that to include things like this
Binary explosives for recreational purposes.
simply
Bang.
because it fits what the intent of that ordinance was to begin with.
Yeah.
Has this individual ever applied for a fireworks permit?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah. And I was involved in the outdoor firearms industry for over 25 years, and we had a chance to be representatives of this company. And when we saw what it did and what it had as a potential problem or sales, our agency declined to do it just because of the lack of why would you do this and what, and the danger that's involved. And even the customers that ended up buying it and retailing it, they had, soul-searching meetings about whether they should list it and have it available, but their customer base seemed to want it, so they put it in as long as it was used legally. But, there's obviously people that won't use it legally. I've been a shooter for my entire life. I see no reason to have the product either.
Okay, I think we bring this back to or bring the fireworks ordinance to the next meeting and insert
Yeah.
the appropriate language.
Um, We had a similar situation on Mink River Road
Oh,
several
yeah.
years ago,
Yeah.
shooting in the pit down there. And we did write several letters. We had the owner pretty well convinced that maybe he should cut back on it. But then he passed away and his descendants went in there and started shooting, so we started up again. And we actually, and it wasn't really toning down too much because people in Ellison Bay could hear it quite a ways away. So we actually took a measure of telling him we might be considering eminent domain and taking that property away from him, and which is a long, convoluted procedure, and it's nothing anybody really wants to do. And then after that, it pretty much ended, and I haven't heard any more complaints about that for some time now.
I remember that. My husband and I were discussing that when I was looking all this up, and we were talking about it. That's where the 90-round magazines were
Right.
starting to go off, and that's just over the top. And it's sad, because for many, many years, hunters would sight in their guns before deer season there. Respectable, responsible gun owners. And now they can't. And that's why I say, people like this that have to have a bigger boom, more rounds, for whatever reason, make it rough for the rest of us who are responsible. It makes me mad.
Well, if memory serves me correct, it started a fire too,
Yeah,
It-
it did.
above the pit, so.
Not surprising.
Should we, before the next meeting, then should we write him a letter?
Oh, sure. Let him know what we're gonna do.
Okay.
And see if he wants to come and address us, that's fine. Okay,
Okay,
all right, then moving on. We have the election workers for 2020.
The
You
list
should,
is on the board.
everybody's talking about the election of 2020. All right, I'll make a motion to approve the poll worker list for the town as presented.
second?
Any other discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Operator licenses?
There are none.
Oh, I'm sorry.
How about 17?
I jumped ahead. 17, discussion and possible action regarding the electronic highway speed signs, which I think has been in our possession for 2 years.
Is
It's
that the
pushing that,
traffic
yeah.
thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the speed, to
The
read the
speed,
speed.
yeah, yeah,
The calming
Calming
Calming.
signs. yes.
calming.
Has it been that long?
I think so. 2 years?
It's probably getting close.
Yeah. And I know, it strikes me that the only thing they're doing now, they're not calming anything but collecting dust. And it seems we have an investment there, And there've been all sorts of reasons why they haven't been installed. And if we all remember correctly, the Ellison Bay Beautification Group came to us and asked us to please slow down the traffic going through
yeah.
Ellison Bay. And we took the initiative and the investment, you know, to buy these signs and to install them. And it did take, because you can get them, you know, hardwired or using solar, but solar in that case in Ellison Bay wasn't really feasible because of the tree coverage and so forth. But the last I knew, we were waiting for WPS to do the drop, and they have to go under the pavement to do that. And then we were waiting for Action Electric, and I don't know where we're at now.
Then we were waiting for the posts themselves, and I know Doug kept asking if they had showed up. No, they hadn't showed up. Well, they finally showed up. Well, they showed up just about the time that the guys had to get going on getting the roads ready for paving this fall. And they had been working on Cedar Dell before that. We had one guy that was off for several weeks due to health issues this summer, so they were taxed as far as getting everything done. And now they've finally gotten caught up with the Garrett Bay Hill. That's been widened out in preparation for paving next summer. And now, looking at the weather, they're gonna be getting the sanders and whatnot on the truck. So I was out and talked to them yesterday. There was a breakdown that they were working on, and they said this is the first breather they've had for a while because of what's the work and whatnot is going on. Well, now that the season is over, Ellison Bay is kind of deserted in the wintertime quite a bit. So I haven't pushed them to put it on at this point because of that, and I thought maybe if we waited till spring.
Yeah, I thought we already had paid bills for the, you know, the power drops and things like that, so you can't just abandon it.
No.
But, you know,
And if memory serves me correct, some of the comments from the Ellison Bay beautification people were, a lot of that traffic going too fast through Ellison Bay happens to be local traffic.
oh, yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's gonna, you know, I don't think it's seasonal that we should look at it. If there's a time that the crew could put these up, I think we should do it as, you know, expediently as possible.
Yeah. Well, and we are, you know, it is a matter of safety, pedestrian safety as well, and I
Absolutely.
think that's a
Yeah.
responsibility we should, you know, consider, so. Yeah, I would like to suggest that we ask the town crew to put them in ASAP,
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good.
Sure.
all right? Everybody, okay,
Yep.
great. Now, operator licenses.
There are none.
There are none. Correspondence, please.
We have a DNR letter saying that we are being informed that a grant from the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program has been tentatively awarded to support the acquisition of 23.68 acres of land, the Pluff property, in the town of Liberty Grove. And then they don't tell us where it is. So I don't know, we just got this on the first, so I don't know where it is. So we'd have to call them up and ask for a parcel number. Yeah, to get to
The Pluff,
where it
there's a lot of Pluffs.
Or ask, or else call the Pluff family. What did you do, yeah. Friends of Plum and Pilot Island newsletter. The county has launched a website called housingdoorcounty.org, providing an overview of information and resources regarding housing issues in general, as well as affordable housing issues specific to Door County. It offers resources and information for individuals, developers, municipalities, and organizations on many housing-related topics, including purchase, financing, videos of presentations, and affordable housing successes in the county. Again, it's called housingdoorcounty.org. A application to put riprap on Lake Michigan at 11991 State Highway 42, Ellison Bay. seeing it's at Lake Michigan, that must be up near Gills Rock, I would think. And the water is safe to drink once more at the fire station and Gills Rock Park. And we have a order for putting some land into forest tax laws. This one is owned by Darla Yanni. Gives her address as Milwaukee Street in Waterford. And it does give the parcel identification number. And this one is around the curve, heading for Gills Rock on the west side of the road. That's it.
Okay. Future meetings.
I have a question
ahead.
about future meeting. Bud, the coastal management, with regard to the educational signs at Port de Mort, I had said we'll go with putting them on the rail. We probably should put that on a future agenda and let the board formally say that GODC can do that because it is
Yeah.
town property.
Coming up in November. Tomorrow, the RPC meets at 3:30 on the Yacht Harbor Shores application for, I guess it's almost essentially renewal of a permit that's expired.
Again,
Tent Committee meets at 7 o'clock. Tuesday the 12th, Parks meets at 9 a.m. Econ Development 7 p.m. and Library Commission at 1 p.m. On the 13th, Plan Commission. Okay. 20th is the Town Board at 7, preceded by the Sanitary District meeting at 6:30, and a special board meeting at 6 p.m. Mining class invitations will be going out for the mining class, which will be held here again this winter in January. December 2nd is Highway Committee at 8 a.m., Town Board on the 4th. Trip Committee at the county on the 10th for the trip application for the town. One thing I neglected to mention was the multimodal program, which Steve Parent has worked on for Mink River Road. That deadline, I believe, is December 1st, or the 6th, one of those two, so that's being worked on. That's it.
Fire board on the 18th as well, 2:45, December 18th.
Fire Board on the 18th,
December 18th, yeah,
yeah.
2:45.
Okay, before we adjourn, from Robert Louis Stevenson, quote, "Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds you plant," end quote. I move we adjourn.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.